see a quorum. We are convened the Senate Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade. We are to examine and report on Canadian foreign policy regarding Iran, its implications, and other related matters. Before I turn to the witnesses, I will remind senators that upon completion of the testimony, we will revert to our other study on user fees, and we will have a vote on that matter. And
I have a question on the note we just received from DFIG. No, that's fine. I'm going to wait.
All right. We will get to that point. We were just starting again our study on Iran, and we have before us as individuals three experts, 2 lawyers and 1 professor, and by video conference we have or Associate Professor of Political Science from the University of Toronto, Ramin Jahanbegloo, and Mr. Ali Ehsassi, a lawyer here before us in person, and Mr. Kaveh Shahrooz. I understand that there has been some agreement that Professor Jahanbegloo will start by video conference. So welcome to the committee. We would appreciate short interventions by our witnesses so that we can leave enough time for questions and answers from our senators. So welcome to the committee and to the continuance of our study. Professor Jahanbegloo.
Madame la Présidente, Mesdames.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm very grateful for this opportunity to appear before you and address a subject which, in my view, deserves more attention than it currently receives. I would like to share my main concerns about the violations of human rights in Iran and offer you some recommendations. Let me start by saying that we are witnessing a historic time in the world, especially as it relates to the changes in the Middle East. Given these momentous political changes, it's all the more important that we take a closer look at the status of democratization, but also the violation of human rights in Iran. No one familiar with Iranian politics would be foolish enough to argue that the Islamic Republic of Iran is a normal country with which Canada can have normal diplomatic, economic, and cultural relations. Henry Kissinger used to say that diplomacy is the art of restraining power, but in the case of Iran, the only thing known for sure is that any failure to act effectively against the violations of human rights in Iran will complicate all future efforts of the international community to restrain the repressive power of the Islamic Republic against its own people. 3 years after the disputed presidential elections of 2009, the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran continues to deteriorate and is in a state of unprecedented crisis. Hardly any group has been spared. Journalists, lawyers, human rights activists, women's rights activists, intellectuals, members of minority groups, and students are among those targeted by the paranoid Iranian government. Ordinary citizens are also routinely mistreated. And as we sit here today, scores of civic activists and human rights activists are imprisoned for their efforts to bring change to Iran. I think that the human rights situation in Iran has never been graver and also dangerous as it is today, even for Iranian Canadians who travel to Iran and find themselves in the Evin prison on the charges of being spies and velvet revolutionaries. Given this reality, I think it's an urgent task and deep responsibility for the Canadian government to pursue policies that empower the democratic actors in Iran while disclosing the face of the Iranian regime and penalizing its principal instruments of repression. The Canadian government has been uniquely courageous in the past in holding Iran accountable for these gross violations. it can now more convincingly lead the international community in responding to the human rights abuses in Iran by putting pressure on the Iranian regime to curb its criminal behavior. Therefore, I'm among those in the Iranian community in Canada who argue that the human rights, rather than the nuclear issue, should be the focus of Canadian foreign policy. And I take the liberty herewith to recommend to the honourable members of this commission the following actions. First, human rights sanctions are useful and effective ways of targeting abusers and communicating international concerns to the Iranian people. Human rights sanctions are easier to initiate and have tremendous symbolic effect. The more abusers we sanction, the more we make transparent the mechanisms of repression in Iran. Second, the key challenge for Canada, I think, is to connect with the Iranian civil society. As important as political declarations on Iran may be, such measures are limited and ineffective. It would be important if Canada could redouble its efforts to assist Iranian human rights and civil society activists, and in practical terms, that means funding programs that enable Iranian dissidents and Democrats to communicate with each other safely. And I mean here access to information, which is very critical, and I'm also mean here that internet access and broadcast media and the Canadian institutions, I think, could help Iranians by supporting grants to gain access to the internet as a means to expand communications and create cyber forums. Third, Canada should continue to deny admission to senior Iranian officials and to encourage other countries to follow. This is an important means of isolating those responsible for abuses and expressing solidarity with the democratic forces. Even if some visits are still allowed in the name of dialogue, I think ruling elite should no longer be welcomed in Canada, and the Canadian government should be in a position to ensure Canadian citizens that Iranian leaders and collaborators to the regime would never step foot in Canada. And last but not least, as the Canadian government is exploring effective means of pressure to force the Islamic regime to comply with the international laws and above all recognize the civil rights of its citizens, I think it is very crucial to remember the critical role and the important situation of the Iranian diaspora in Canada and their need to have contact with their relatives. And as such, I take the liberty to add herewith to my recommendations the deep concern of the Iranian community in Canada in relation with the closing of the Canadian visa section in Tehran and with numerous cases of rejection of visas to Iranian students and their families. I think these measures have certainly negative impacts on the image of Canada as a safe haven for Iranian dissidents, and I would only add that engaging, informing and helping Iranian youth to understand Canadian policies and values is part of the important role played by the public diplomacy in Canada. Thank you all for your attention and concern, and thank you in advance for concrete steps that you can take to help the people of Iran realize their fundamental human rights.
Thank you, Professor. We'll now turn to Mr. Ehsassi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honourable Senators, thank you for inviting me here today. I commend the distinguished members of this committee for undertaking a thorough examination of Canada's foreign policy regarding Iran, and I certainly hope that I can be of assistance. Iran is a country that has proven difficult to understand at the best of times. While the country has always represented an enigma, wide-scale protests in Iran in 2009, coupled with the cascade of more recent developments throughout the Middle East region, have added further layers of complexity. The international community first took notice of the depths of the unpopularity of the Iranian regime in the summer of 2009. By the admission of functionaries of the Iranian government itself, over 3 million Iranians took to the streets of Tehran alone. It is well to emphasize that the size of such crowds in cities scattered around Iran dwarfed more recent protests that have occurred throughout the Middle East region. The cataclysmic events of the summer of 2009 have shaken the very foundations of the Islamic Republic. Since then, the international community and Iranians have had to deal with a regime reeling in paranoia and cognizant that it suffers from a profound legitimacy crisis. As a consequence, we have watched Iran steadily morph into a military dictatorship operating behind the facade of a theocracy. Apart from being subjected to a thoroughly discredited ideology for over 30 years, Iranians have had to contend with a regime with an abysmal human rights record, feral economics, and endemic corruption. Other implications have been an Iranian foreign policy characterized by bluff and bluster, and a concerted effort by the regime to curtail the dealings of Iranians with the outside world. Consequently, we should be cognizant of the social and economic implications of these policies. Impervious to the well-being of its populace, the Iranian regime would like nothing better than to completely have the international community recoil from dealing with Iran. The unsettling change at the core of the Iranian regime and the shift in Tehran's orientation presents foreign policy makers with daunting challenges. Yet the principal lesson to be drawn is the need to recognize the divide between the Iranian government and Iranians, and to exploit, to the extent possible, the chasm that separates the apparatus of the Islamic Republic from the majority of the Iranian public and fortify civil society towards that endeavor. While it would be counterproductive to overestimate the extent to which Canada may influence events unfolding in Iran, in crafting options, we must invariably choose between instances in which the best means are to act collectively through multilateral means, while in other instances we should tailor discrete initiatives to our own specifications. Canada is viewed very favorably by a majority of Iranians. Unlike many other countries, we are not saddled by the perception that we have ever engaged in political machinations in our dealings with Tehran. To the contrary, one must commend Canadian diplomats in Iran for having established a fine tradition of spearheading worthy cultural initiatives before the tragic death of Nizara Kazemi. The most prominent example, of course, being the Terry Fox Run, which was held in Tehran for several years. Moreover, Canada is now home to a sizable and vibrant Iranian community with emotional and intellectual ties to their country of origin. Over the course of the past year, talk of a possible war has inundated the news and dominated international headlines. Given our legitimate concerns, the Canadian government has acted in lockstep with its closest allies. Iran's acquisition of nuclear technology, after all, is subject to international norms and represents a challenge solely amenable to multilateral diplomacy. The yardstick against which any sanctioned regime must be judged is whether it targets the Iranian government without, to the extent possible, indiscriminately punishing the Iranian public at large. My personal view is that the sanctions introduced to date have been far too lenient on the top echelons of the Iranian regime and sweeping in their impact on the Iranian public. By way of example, while the overbite of the legislation ensnares virtually every Iranian Canadian, only a mere 49 of the top apparatchiks of the Islamic Republic have been blacklisted under Canadian legislation. That having been said, one must accept that the package of international sanctions adopted against Iran are the product of international policy coordination, and it would be folly to expect Canada not to act in concert with its closest allies. Yet one would hope that interpreting the Special Economic Measures Act, the Canadian government refrains from imposing undue restrictions on individuals and activities not associated with the Iranian government. The more disconcerting development has been the public dimension of Canadian diplomacy and the manner in which we have communicated our approach to Iran. While scenes of millions of heroic Iranians demanding their rights in 2009 and the brutality of the Iranian government that followed are etched in the memory of millions of people around the world, one would be hard-pressed to find any evidence that it has impacted Canada's approach to Iran. Although Canada should be commended for assisting the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations in its annual assessment of Iran's abysmal human rights record, the practice was initiated several years prior to 2009. Far too often, we have resorted to megaphone diplomacy and ratcheted up the rhetoric on the nuclear issue. and been more or less silent on other priorities. While a more nuanced approach would be advisable, this should not be taken to suggest that our foreign policy establishment should be anything but bold vis-à-vis Iran, or less than innovative in advancing other interests. While we are proud on insisting that our foreign policy is guided by moral equivalency, we must avail ourselves of every opportunity to stand tall in promoting Canadian values and effectuating a deliberate policy of emboldening Iranian civil society. In conclusion, I would be remiss if I did not also emphasize that the Canadian government in general has not done a very good job of harnessing the expertise of Iranian Canadians in crafting a sensible, sophisticated, and just approach towards Iran. To cite one example, for years, many Canadians of Iranian origin have been very vocal in expressing their disdain with our country becoming a safe haven for the most odious high-level officials and apparatchiks of the Iranian regime. When the Canadian media first reported that the former head of the largest state-owned Iranian bank, Mohammad Reza Khavari, had arrived in Toronto with a Canadian passport in his pocket and settled in the Bridle Path neighborhood of Toronto, reaction by the Iranian Canadian community was swift, with well over 2,000 Iranians signing a petition addressed to the Minister of Immigration. Given the bank's involvement in financing international terrorism, I am sure all Canadians are concerned with Mr. Khavari's presence here in Canada. To this day, 6 months later, the Canadian public and media are completely in the dark as to whether the Canadian government is contemplating any action on this particular issue. Another very recent decision that has caught the Iranian Canadian community completely by surprise is the announcement that the Canadian Embassy in Tehran will be closing its visa section and relocating to Ankara. As you can imagine, this will impose a very heavy burden on the relatives of many Iranian Canadians. I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ehsassi. And now I'll turn to Mr. Shahrooz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honourable Senators, thank you for inviting me to testify today about Canada's Iran policy. At the outset, allow me to explicitly state the two premises upon which my argument will rest. The first premise is that the Iranian government is unequivocally a brutal tyranny. It is, to varying degrees, a danger to its region and a potential threat to the international community. But primarily, the Iranian government poses a danger to the Iranian people. Summary executions, extraterritorial assassinations, torture, rape, gender and religious apartheid have been a consistent part of the Iranian government's policy for over 30 years. Such human rights violations peaked with mass executions in the 1980s and a brutal crackdown on pro-democracy protesters in 2009. Canada has not been unaffected by these human rights violations. The Iranian government murdered Zahra Kazemi, a Canadian photojournalist, and continues to imprison a number of Canadian citizens and permanent residents, like Saeed Malikpour, Hamid Qasemi Shal, and Hossein Darakhshan, individuals whose cases Senator Frum has actually courageously championed. The second premise is that notwithstanding the brutality of the Iranian government, military action against Iran over its nuclear program would have tremendously negative consequences. By many expert accounts, a strike would only briefly delay Iran's development of nuclear weapons, while potentially resulting in countless civilian casualties. An attack may also lead to terrifying instability like the kind we saw unfold in Iraq after the US invasion, and it holds the very counterproductive possibility of prolonging the life of the current regime by allowing this government to portray itself as a defender of Iran's sovereignty, and with that portrayal as pretext to unleash further internal repression. In light of these two premises, I submit to you that the most effective way to bring about a positive change in Iran is to adopt the protection of human rights as the primary driver of Canada's Iran policy. Pursuing human rights protection for Iranians is not only the morally correct approach, but it also allows Canada to capitalize on core Canadian foreign policy strengths. Regardless of which party has formed Canada's government, whether it was Pearson's efforts at ending a war or Diefenbaker's outspoken opposition to the policy of apartheid, Canada has always been at its foreign policy best when it has championed the rights of ordinary people across the world to live with dignity, safety, and security. On that basis, permit me to offer 5 specific policy suggestions which I believe would be vital components of a muscular, human rights-focused Iran policy. First, Canada should use the UN General Assembly and the UN Human Rights Council as the fora to continue to pressure Iran on its human rights record. For 9 straight years, the Canadian government has introduced a resolution at the UN General Assembly condemning Iran's human rights record. Last year, that resolution garnered record support from nearly 90 countries. It is critical that Canada continue its leadership of this resolution and that we expand the language of the resolution to condemn Iran for mass atrocities for the past 30 years, for which there has been no accountability. Similarly, Canada should work with like-minded countries and non-Western countries with clout, like Brazil, India, South Africa, and Turkey, to pressure Iran to permit the Special Rapporteur on Iran to visit the country and to speak with political prisoners. Second, unlike the US and the European Union, Canada has not linked any of its sanctions to human rights violations. It is important that we impose travel bans and asset freezes for Iranian human rights violators, thus signaling that Canada will not allow human rights violations to go unpunished. Closely connected to such sanctions, Canada should amend or consider amending its State Immunity Act to allow victims of Iran's gross human rights violations to obtain civil redress here in Canada. Third, Canada should close its doors to those with significant ties to the Iranian government and instead welcome Iranian activists fleeing persecution. As Mr. Ehsassi alluded, in recent months there have been credible reports that at least one individual who served as a senior official in the Iranian government and was a key player in a large embezzlement scandal in Iran was living in one of Toronto's most affluent neighborhoods. At the same time, many democracy activists who have fled Iran continue to languish in bordering countries, unable to obtain refugee status. Canada should welcome such activists with open arms and should show agents of the Iranian government the door. Fourth, Canada should focus on empowering average Iranian people to demand their own rights and should win hearts and minds wherever possible. A critical way of empowering Iranian activists is to provide them with technology to circumvent barriers to obtaining access to the Internet. Such a strategy would be consistent with international declarations on Internet freedom, which Canada has signed. Winning hearts and minds is tougher, requiring our policymakers to be cognizant of how Canadian policies are perceived abroad. As both other speakers have alluded to, just recently Canada decided, for budgetary reasons, to close its visa office in Tehran. I concede that the actual effects of this decision will not actually be known for some time. But regardless of the actual effect, the perception of this decision among Iranians has been overwhelmingly negative, leaving Iranians with the impression that Canada is punishing them for the actions of their government, a government which they do not support. Fifth and finally, the members of the Canadian Senate ought to be commended for speaking out so forcefully in recent months and championing the cases of a number of Iranian political prisoners. This policy should be expanded within and beyond the Senate, and I would be happy to provide you with the names of other political prisoners in Iran whose cases require immediate attention. It is my understanding that Professor Erwin Kotler, a figure well known to people here, has actually begun a political prisoner advocacy group, and I urge every member of the Senate and the House of Commons to join that. Keeping the spotlight on Iran on such an issue is literally a matter of life and death for a number of political prisoners in Iran. Distinguished Senators, I would be happy to discuss any of these proposals at greater length during the question and answer period. I believe that these strategies and other creative approaches, if carried out by Canada and coordinated with other human rights respecting nations, can lead to tremendously positive changes in Iran, the kinds of changes that will hopefully allow us in the not too distant future to welcome an Iranian spring. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a long list already of senators. I'm going to start with our Deputy Chair, Senator Down, followed by Senator Fortin-Duplessis, Senator Frum, Senator Nolan, Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Given the size of the list, I'll be brief. I'm curious about this official you named who came into Canada 6 months ago. Do you have any information on how he obtained a Canadian passport? And do you have any information how he was able to transfer the money he was accused of stealing to Canada? Obviously, he transferred or he would not have the house in the neighborhood you named.
Yes, thank you for that question. I was intimately involved in efforts by the Iranian community to actually liaise with the Canadian government and try to come to some answers on this particular question. We were first informed that this person had arrived here in Canada when the Canadian media actually broke this story. However, at that particular juncture, as I said in my opening statement, 2,000 Iranians came together really within the span of 2 or 3 days and signed a petition demanding that the Minister of Immigration look into this matter. And I can tell you that for at least 4 or 5 months, the Minister of Immigration did not even acknowledge receipt of this particular petition or email. After that happened, we actually spoke to various parties in Parliament. We spoke to Mr. Irwin Cotler and Mr. Paul Dewar, and they both had us prepare a petition that we had read out in Parliament. However, the answer that was coming back from the government, again, told us nothing about this particular individual. Most of the information that we do have about this banker is publicly available information. For example, his houses, he has several houses listed. It's publicly listed, so we were able to obtain that information. However, as I said, neither the Canadian media nor any member of the Iranian community has ever been provided any information as to whether this person has arrived here or not, what year he may have obtained his Canadian citizenship, and whether he remains in the country and whether the government will ultimately decide to do anything about him.
So you only found out about this through media reports, so there could be other officials in Canada that we're totally unaware of as well. You indicated as well, or the other witness may have indicated as well, that there's all kinds of refugees on borders with no resources to get here. I'm particularly interested, do you have any information at all how this person was able to transfer money? The money, I assume, must have been already out of the country in banks somewhere in Switzerland, and then somehow was able to get it to Canada. But you mentioned, the witnesses have mentioned, how we don't have any restrictions on financial transactions for human rights violators in Canada, and other countries have those restrictions. Could you tell us what those restrictions are?
Restrictions on people,
financial.
The financial restrictions that are there.
I'm happy to speak to that, Senator. The Special Economic Measures Act basically prevents anyone from doing business with Iran, any financial institution. Mind you, the Special Economic Measures Act was tightened and strengthened as of January 2012. So it's quite possible, though I'm operating largely in the dark here, it's quite possible that this individual brought large amounts of money into the country before the Special Economic Measures Act was tightened. But I think going back to your initial question, yes, it's quite possible that there are many figures with ties to the Islamic regime here in the country. There's certainly talk within the Iranian-Canadian community that such individuals are there. The case that Mr. Ehsassi and I have both alluded to is simply the best known one. It's the one that was spoken about most clearly by the Canadian media.
My last question, Chair. Is there any pressure on international financial institutions? If somebody shows up from one of these countries with millions and millions of dollars, obviously stolen, and they go to deposit it, are you aware of any cases where the banks or the financial institutions in Switzerland or in Canada simply question that amount and refuse to accept it?
Well, Senator, I think with respect to high-ranking figures in the Iranian government, I suspect that they're sophisticated players and that they probably don't simply show up at a bank with millions of dollars. They probably use a number of front companies, for example, to move that money into the country. And that, I think, is cause for all of us to be worried, first of all, and cause for our security forces and intelligence forces to be on the lookout for these kinds of transactions. But your question actually leads me to something else, which is that even though these figures are probably able to move large sums of money into the country, there are quite a number of people with no ties to the regime who are very negatively affected by these sanctions, whose accounts are being closed by a number of Canadian banks because of the Special Economic Measures Act. They have no ties, and yet they're being caught by these overbroad regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps just a few. You're aware that there are international mechanisms on assets and the flow of assets, and that Canada has obligations under various acts to disclose large, significant amounts. Now, all of those were put in place originally, not all of them, but many of them were put in place originally to catch drug activity and the proceeds of crime, and they apply equally now. So when you say human rights violators, what do you mean? Because we have some for terrorists, some for nefarious activity, and some specifically now the freezing of assets after the collapse of a regime. And therefore you get evidence. And you know, that legislation we put in place last year, we had to balance individuals' rights and opinions of nefarious activity, and you need facts, and the facts are often held in the government that conducted the nefarious activity. So all of this, what is it you want that we don't have internationally or nationally now? Is it, you say human rights violators? I'm not quite sure how that would work.
Senator, thank you for that question. I think there are several aspects to that particular question. The first thing is, to the extent that I understand, and I obviously stand to be corrected, I think that the Americans have been much more vigilant in actually listing individuals on various legislation that they have, blacklisting individuals. It's not just the number of individuals that they have blacklisted. As I understand, the U.S. is actually making a point of demonstrating that it cares about human rights and listing individuals who are perpetrators of human rights violations on its blacklist. Again, I stand to be corrected, but as far as I understand, all of the individuals and companies that we have listed are not primarily perpetrators of human rights violations in Iran. They are people who engage in commercial activities, which we obviously have an interest in trying to stop. That would be the first part of my response. The second part is, and this also goes to Senator Robichaud's question as well. As I said, the Iranian community for several years has been under the impression that there are high-level functionaries of the Iranian government who do hold Canadian passports. Of course, as you can imagine, it's very, very difficult for a community to police itself and to undertake investigative work. But, however, to the extent that we have spoken to various politicians, they always tell us, well, you know, if there is any person that you are concerned about, please do bring that to our attention. Obviously, that's a very, very cumbersome and difficult process. In this particular instance, as I suggested and highlighted, this was brought to our attention by the media. So essentially, the media provided us with what you would refer to as that aha moment, where we thought we could use this and perhaps see the bureaucracy demonstrate that it does take these types of complaints seriously. As I've said, nothing that the government has done so far would suggest to us that we should, be more zealous in our efforts to try to trace people who may be living here, may have Canadian passports, or may very well be wiring money out of the country. It's been very discouraging, if you will.
Right. Senator Fortin.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question is to the Professor Jahanbegloo. Like you, I am very concerned about the gaps in human rights enforcement. There is a high number of difficulties, that is to say, amongst many others, torture, exorbitant types of sanctions, and severe restrictions on the freedom of press, freedom of expression, association, movement, and religion. Given all of this, what is Iran's response to the international community with respect to the state of human rights in that country? Have you seen any improvement over the past?
I have not seen any improvement, and I think that the response, the last response that we had was that at the Subcommission of Human Rights at the United Nations, and the response was provided by nobody else but one of the members of the Larijani family, very well known in Iran as some of the dignitaries of the regime. And actually it was somehow a way of dismissing the reports which were put forward by the rapporteur of the United Nations on Human Rights and also the Canadian government. So I think that the response coming from the Iranian government in the past 33 years has always been in a way dismissing all the reports. I myself, I was a human rights activist for 13 years, and for some time I spent in the sessions of the Human Rights Subcommission, and I remember that we had the same problems around 20 years ago, and nothing has been changed since. And I do believe that we need to have tougher sanctions at the level of the human rights policies of not only Canada but other countries.
Madam Senator.
Merci pour votre réponse.
Thank you for your answer. I have another question which is a bit shorter, but I would like you to answer it. After the election in Iran, the reform wasn't very weighty. For the reform to occur between the Khomeini members that were elected and the Supreme Council. We know that there is a control of information. We know that there is control of the petroleum industry there. We know that in 2013, though, there will be new presidential elections that will be held. Mr. Ahmadinejad will not be participating. What do you foresee for the future for those who support Ahmadinejad or those who are against him?
The issue that we did not bring up and should be underlined, I think, is the existence of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards institution, which actually have I would say, economic and political profile, and they are in control of, as not only political decision makers but also economic decision makers, are in the control most of the country. So I do believe that, as we saw back in 2009, most of the danger comes from two essential repressive institutions in Iran, being the Basij, which is a paramilitary group very close to the supreme leader, and the IRGC, which is Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, which actually also control the whole nuclear issue in their hands. So I do believe that even if tomorrow Mr. Ahmadinejad is no more president, I mean, he's not a man really in charge in Iran, and especially in the repressive institutions which violate the human rights.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Jen, I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank you all for your hard work on behalf of Iranian human rights. And Mr. Shahrooz, thank you very much for your kind comments. And I appreciate what you said about our initiative here in the Senate, but I also agree with you that there's much more that we can do and should do, and I know my colleagues, and I feel strongly that we want to do it. My question is a bit of a follow-up to our Chair's line of questioning, in terms of how the way that we can keep bad actors and collaborators out of Canada. I want to ask you each about your view about listing the IRGC as a terrorist entity, putting it on the Canadian list, and I maybe would like some clarification about. It's my understanding that virtually every member of the Iranian elite or is a member of the IRGC, and so it would be a broad net in which to catch people. And the banker, I won't pronounce his name properly, but would someone like that have been a member of the IRGC, and would that have been a way to keep him out if there was a way of understanding that he was a member? Who wants to go first on that?
Senator, that's an excellent question. I'm not entirely sure that this particular person would be caught in such a net. But it's important to note that the IRGC is not simply a military force. It's actually an incredibly large commercial force inside the country. So by actually listing them as a terrorist organization, you do actually capture a large part of the apparatus of the Islamic Republic. And I think that would actually be excellent policy. And I think it's, you know, if you look at all the Iranian government's activities that are threatening to the international community and that repress people internally, they can oftentimes be traced back to the IRGC. It really is at the epicenter of the Islamic Republic. Its fingerprints are all over terrorist activities across the world, and be it in Argentina, recent attacks in Thailand, elsewhere. As Professor Jahanbegloo noted, it is in charge of the nuclear file in Iran in large part, and it really is the single most important institution in that country. Listing it as a terrorist organization, I think would go a long way in achieving the sort of muscular human rights policy that I alluded to in my remarks.
Would you care to comment?
Yes, of course. Yes, you're absolutely correct. The IRCG has actually has a much more elevated position within Iranian society over the course of the past 7 years. Since Mr. Ahmadinejad was first elected, various members of the IRGC have joined cabinet. It was a new dynamic that was unleashed under Mr. Ahmadinejad's first administration. In addition to that, as things changed and took a turn for the worse in 2009, we see that all the various political factions in Iran, whether it's the supreme leader or President Ahmadinejad, they are constantly trying to curry favor with the IRCG just to bolster their own position within the Iranian political hierarchy. As a result of that, I think if you look at most estimates and studies that have been undertaken, as Mr. Shahrooz alluded, it is now estimated that the IRCG and other military and paramilitary groups, they control approximately 50% of the swath of the Iranian economy. What has happened is they decide what industries they should cherry pick and what industries are profitable, and they can easily move themselves into that. Another anecdote which will perhaps assist you in recognizing how integral they are and how embedded they are in the Iranian administration is that the current Minister of Oil and Petroleum is also a former IRCG member. So I think it would be very much welcome if the entire machinery of the IRCG was blacklisted. This is an organization that provides the backbone for the Iranian economy, and of course I think it's absolutely imperative that we recognize that they are heavily involved in providing financing for international terrorism that the Iranian government undertakes. With respect to the individual who arrived here, Mr. Khavari, he, of course, was not an IRCG member himself, but the bank at which he was at the helm of, which I should emphasize was the largest state-owned bank in Iran, was very instrumental in providing funding to Iran's terrorist activities around the region.
Mm-hmm. So in his particular case, that in fact a blacklisting of the organization would not have helped.
Well, his bank, actually, oddly enough, the bank which he was at the helm of was blacklisted. So, you know, that's not the only means by which we can try to ensnare some of the Iranian government's top officials.
Mm-hmm. Professor, can I just get you on the record about whether or not you agree with the idea of putting them on the list?
Mr. Senator, I absolutely agree with my colleagues. I think that listing IRGC as a terrorist organization would be a right move in the right direction. And I need to add, as my colleagues did, that the IRGC is not only a terrorist group, it's not just a military group, is only also an economic institution and a financial institution, but they also have prisons, they have been torturing people, and very strangely there was a case which were not mentioned by my friends and myself, and this was brought up a few years ago in Toronto, and that had to do with one of the members of the Larijani family too, and it happened that one of my colleagues at the York University realized that there was a center, a cultural center created by the name of the Center for Iranian Studies at Shepherd, around Shepherd area in Toronto, and this was actually a front, a cultural front for some of these groups, and actually when it broke out by the media, by the Canadian media, we realized that the house where this center was based was bought by one of the brothers of the Larijani family. So as soon as we signed a petition, eight Iranian Canadian professors signed a petition, and as a result, their website went down, and they stopped their collaboration, they stopped their activities. But nevertheless, this was a good example of understanding how the money got into Canada and what use they were making of it. I mean, by using a cultural front. So I do believe that, as my colleagues said. Just to add very quickly, I think that IRGC money could come indirectly into this country and be used, of course I don't have any proofs for that, but be used eventually in different activities, and we have to be very careful and very vigilant about this.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Froman. There is a supplementary on this issue from Senator Robichaud.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair.
The members of the force in question known, if we were to put restrictions, I mean, how many of them could be affected by that? Or are there members that are not openly known that are, because you say it's a force, but it's also involved in business transactions and just about everything goes on there.
Oh, well, as you can imagine, the system in Iran is very, very opaque. But I think that at the very least, should we determine that that would be a good idea to list individuals or the IRCG itself, I think you can, with the assistance of numerous experts, you can identify the very top echelons of the organization. I don't believe that would pose a huge challenge.
Merci. Merci.
Just maybe a supplementary on that. Those that have been listed by Canada, are they, by and large, part of the Guard?
Yes, I believe the top echelons of the organization have been listed. Maybe the top 5 or 6 officials, but obviously this is an organization with roots running throughout the country, so we could perhaps do better on that particular front.
Thank you. Senator Nolan.
Thank you, and thanks to all 3 of our witnesses for being here today. I'd just like to change the focus of the discussion, if I may. Our discussion often centers on what happens in Iran, but I'd like to come back to you and to the composition of the Iranian diaspora in Canada. This diaspora is of interest to me. Most recent statistics show us that more than 120,000 persons of Iranian descent live here in Canada. First of all, I'd like to hear from you where these people live. Because I understand from the notes that we are given that most of these people of Iranian descent who are Canadians are first generation. Perhaps you're not part of that group, but I'd like to better understand basically who are these Iranians who live in Canada? And I'll certainly have a few other questions afterwards that might be more specific once I've heard your general answer from the three witnesses.
It's incredibly important for us to set correct Canadian policy, for us to understand more about the Iranian Canadian diaspora. That diaspora can certainly be a link to information about the country. With respect to the Iranian Canadian community, I think your figure is 120,000. That's roughly the number that I've seen. I think by and large the Iranian community lives in Toronto. There are pockets of Iranians living everywhere in the country, Vancouver and Montreal being the other major centers, but I think Toronto is really the hub of Iranian Canadian life, largely in northern Toronto. I think the wave of immigration to Canada from Iran has actually started in and around 1979, immediately after the revolution, and it's come in waves. Basically, every time there was a wave of repression directed at a particular group, members of that religious group or that political group found their way into Canada. So I think if you look at Toronto's Iranian Canadian community, you'll find a wide variety of political opinions, religious groups, and views on the Islamic Republic. But I think by and large, they are very, very concerned about what's happening in their country back home. I would say my guess is, and perhaps my sample is a little bit skewed by the circles in which I move, I think by and large they oppose the Iranian government. I think we saw that in 2009, the numbers of Iranian Canadians that came out to protest, the numbers, for example, that were willing to sign the petition against this individual that we've been talking about. I think issues related to Iran are of great interest to them, and they're worried that Canadian policy may negatively affect them, even though they have no ties to the Islamic Republic. In fact, they're deeply opposed to it, and they're willing to take steps to oppose the government. They're just worried that missteps by Canadian lawmakers would affect them negatively and would affect their family and friends back home.
I'd like to come back to a specific question about the Iranian community here in Canada and their families in Iran. But with you first, Professor. Is there a professional relationship between Iranian professors here and professors in Iran, at a university level? Yes, Senator.
What my colleague said, that I think the Iranian Canadian community is one of the most educated communities in Canada, and unlike those that we see mostly in Europe, because I lived in Europe for a long time and also in the United States, there has been several waves of immigration to Canada, and I think this is a very young community, educated community, so it has been very prolific and very successful, both in business, in academic life, and in artistic life. We have a lot of very well-known Iranian Canadians, which are well-known today in the Canadian society. But in addition to that, to your question, in answer to your question, yes, I do believe that since the academic community inside Iran is also very much repressed and finds itself as a dissident community, there have been a lot of contacts between the academics, Iranian Canadian academics, and Iranian academics inside the country, and I think that this has helped a lot, and especially when I insisted on having grants and creating cyber forums, is to somehow promote this existent, I would say, contacts which we already have, which and goes in the direction of democratization in Iran.
Are there many Iranian students studying here in Canada?
Oui, il y a beaucoup d'étudiants iraniens au Canada.
Canada, and I need to add, in answer to one of the questions which was asked by one of the senators, that we have, among my students at University of Toronto also, there have been many second-generation Iranians, Iranian Canadians, who have grew up in Canada, and most of them, they speak both fluently Farsi and English, and of course, I think this is a very important asset.
I'd like to go back to Mr. Shahrooz with respect to the relations between the Iranian community living here in Canada, the Canadian Iranians, and their families back in Iran. Given the possible financial difficulties that they might face, are there monetary transfers? Is there aid being sent from Canada, from the Iranian Canadian community to their families who are living back in Iran? And if so, what is the scope of that aid?
Understanding that there is some aid that goes back and forth, primarily going, remittance payments going back to Iran from Iranian Canadians. But it's getting increasingly difficult to do that. The Special Economic Measures Act that I've spoken about a couple of times, it has really tightened the noose around any sort of financial activity. There is a carve-out in that law that allows for non-commercial payments up to $40,000, which is helpful, and it allows these types of aid payments to go back. But it still continues to make life very difficult. For example, if you're trying to conduct some sort of business, or if you have property in Iran, for example, and you want to send the money here, or if you want to send some amount beyond that, it's incredibly difficult to do. And as I said, oftentimes financial institutions in Canada take it upon themselves to close bank accounts, for example, even if it falls below that threshold, which continues to make life hard for people that want to get a mortgage, want to just do the stuff of everyday life. So it's very difficult to do.
Do you have a specific recommendation that we should put in our report?
I think that 40,000 threshold, it can perhaps be increased to some extent, but I think there just has to be a look at, there has to be a study of the kind of commercial activity that happens. Beyond that, unfortunately, I can't give you anything more specific. I think there just has to be a look at as I said, the type of money that goes back and forth, just so that we ensure that we capture the right the right transactions, and we allow people to send money back to their families and allow them to allow them to help their families back home.
Merci. Je mettrai mon nom pour la deuxième.
Thank you. I'll put my name down for the second round.
Thank you very much, Chair. Nice to have you here, and thank you for coming. I'd like to follow up with some talk about trade, because our Department of Foreign Affairs in Canada exports about $126 million into Iran in 2011, and imports $34 million. And our largest exports were food, agri-food, pharmaceuticals, metal-based products. And our imports were mostly vegetable, food products, textiles. And according to our department, bilateral investment is currently negligible, with essentially no Iranian investment in Canada. So as a result of the current circumstances, trade data with Iran shows a irregular picture. Would you like to comment on the status of our commercial relationship with Iran today, and has it changed? How has it changed over the past decade?
I'd like to take that one on. Professor, do you have a comment?
My only comment, I think that Mr. Shahrooz is better placed than I in answering it, but my only comment is that I know by fact that the trade relations with Iran has been, between Canada and Iran, has been directly related to the situation of human rights and Canada's foreign policy in relation with the human rights situation in Iran. I remember that around 10 years ago, the trade relationship was much higher, and because of the Zahra Kazemi's case, my own case actually of going to prison in 2006, and the cases which followed of Iranian Canadians, I think that the trade relations between Canada and Iran went down also because of the fact that we didn't have a true representation of Canadian government in Iran, and because of the situations that deteriorated in 2009 and later. And so this, I think, we should take it into consideration.
Well, thank you, Professor. Perhaps I could frame it also a bit more.
Could I ask Mr. Shahrooz was pointed out,
Mr.
perhaps could answer?
Sorry.
No, to be absolutely honest with you, Senator, I don't think I have much to add to that. I think the controlled engagement policy that's in place prevents a great deal of trade from happening. I think the concern really is one that we've talked about at some length. The concern is that payments from family members going back to Iran, those are being caught by the sanctions, and that individuals that have ties to the government are somehow able to evade the measures that are in place.
Yeah, but it was a question asked because of those reasons, right? But also, if I could frame it maybe in this way as well, that like just in this year, 2 months ago, Canada imposed further sanctions under the Special Economic Measures Act, according to our Department of Foreign Affairs, and these measures impose an asset freeze and prohibit dealings with 3 individuals and 5 additional entities of proliferation concern. So in terms of, we were talking about sanctions, how do Canada's sanctions then, given this, compared to those of the U.S., the European Union, and other allies? And can they be strengthened, our sanctions, again, in this respect?
I think Mr. Ehsassi alluded to this a little while ago. U.S. sanctions and EU sanctions in some respects are tougher than Canadian sanctions, and that's because they have a human rights component. The U.S. has actually specifically named a number of individuals for their human rights violations, as has the EU recently. And those individuals are subject to having their assets frozen and are prevented from traveling. The other, I think, element that's different about U.S. sanctions, as far as I know, is that Canadian sanctions are focused only on Canadian individuals inside the country or abroad, individuals inside Canada or Canadians abroad. The U.S. sanctions go beyond that. So if you are even outside the U.S. and you're not American, but you do trade with Iran, oftentimes you're prevented from doing business with the United States. We don't actually have that component here in Canada. So for example, I know that in recent months the state of New York passed regulations saying that if you're an energy company and you do business with Iran, you're not permitted then to bid on contracts with New York State. We don't have anything parallel to that here in Canada, as far as I know.
How many? I would like you to, yeah.
Thank you.
Please.
I had an opportunity to look at bilateral trade figures 7 or 8 years ago when the incident of Ms. Kazemi happened. At that particular juncture, I remember back in 2005, bilateral trade was around 370 million. However, that figure was an anomaly, the reason being that in that year we sold a large shipment of wheat to Iran. So the figures that we see today, which as you indicated hover around $150 million, seem to have been the norm for quite some time. That having been said, and this ties in with the question that Senator Nolan also asked, I think one of the things we could perhaps do to assist both Iranian Canadians and business interests is to provide some guidelines as to how these various regimes come together. There is no doubt in my mind that all these sanctions, which obviously are very complicated, have had a very chilling effect on what is and what is not allowed. And in preparing for coming here before you today, I had an opportunity to look at the transcript of other experts you had spoken to, and this was unbeknownst to me, but I understand the only bank that actually does have a compliance officer is the Bank of Montreal. All other banks find it to be too problematic to actually have to go through the thicket of regulations, which could ensnare them. And I've heard from numerous people that that they are unable to engage any Canadian bank to assist them with financial transactions. So even if our regime, as it currently stands, works, and let's say someone does receive exemptions for medical equipment, they have a very, very difficult time to actually find financial institution here in Canada that would accept that would accept their letter of credit or things of that nature. And so any guidelines that could be provided to the various banks, I presume, would go a very long way.
Okay, so thank you.
All right, thank you. Senator Robichaud.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shahrooz, in one of your recommendations, you've said that we should welcome with our arms wide open the activists that come from Iran. Are you suggesting that there's some hesitation in accepting them here in Canada? And secondly, how can that help the cause of their fellow citizens who still are outside of Canada?
It's my understanding that there are a number of Iranian activists, as I said, languishing in various places. Turkey, for the most part, I think they escape Iran and they stay in Turkey. I think Canada, of the various refugee-accepting countries, Canada's actually had probably the most welcoming approach to Iranian refugees. But by and large, still there are large numbers that, for administrative reasons, for whatever reason, because perhaps there are limits to the number of refugees that we're willing to accept, that continue to stay there without resources and generally without status, and they tend to be ill-treated and left very vulnerable and without protection. To your second question, I think if we were to welcome them here, it would have an immensely positive effect. It would allow Iranian activists to form better networks. It would allow them to bring greater information to bodies like this one, letting us know exactly what is happening inside that country. And you know, a lot of these young activists are incredibly talented at organizing, and I think they would be able to give us a lot of ideas about how we can actually destabilize the Iranian government, or you know, the approaches that we can take to make sure that the Iranian government doesn't continue its policy of repression.
Merci.
Just a follow-up. You say that these people are, by and large, in Turkey.
That's my understanding, yes.
We've moved our services for immigration and other purposes to Ankara. Is this going to be a good move for them? Because you were arguing that we shouldn't have moved it out of Iran, but some of those that would have the mobility and the capability and the need to qualify for refugee status seem to be in Turkey. So wouldn't our services there be a good move?
My understanding is that these are different processes, and I'm by no means an immigration expert, but my understanding is what has moved to Turkey has just been the processing of temporary visas for tourists and students. It's my understanding that the refugee process is an entirely different one, largely unaffected by this decision. I could be wrong about that. Like I said, this is not my area of expertise.
Well, refugee per se, if it's trapped under the UN, but anyone who wishes to come to Canada would get services from, I think, the same source. I hope our researchers will look into exactly whether it is a limited move. I understood we actually shut down our processing service in Iran and moved it to Ankara, so that would be all of the facilities of anyone who would want to apply for any purpose in Canada except through the refugee process that is controlled from the United Nations. So in any event, I think we should clarify it, and you can read the record as we move on. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I've raised this before, but on the subject of listing, the item that I find the most frustrating is that in terms of expatriate Iranians who are in Canada, you know, the group that seems to speak for them more than any other group is the Iran Democratic Association. And, you know, they send some people over every year to the big rally that's in Paris where groups, who are opposed to the current regime, who, want to let their views be known. And I have on 2 occasions attended those conferences, and you never hear anything talked about other than 2 things: democratic principles and human rights. And yet, the biggest single group on that list of people who are fighting for democratic principles and human rights is listed here in Canada as a terrorist group. Now, I think this actually happened a little over 20 years ago, right at the beginning of the Clinton regime, when he was trying to get a dialogue going with the administration over there, and did this because of things that had happened in Camp Ashraf years earlier. The same thing happened in the UK and the EEC, but they went to court and it was taken off in both places, both in the UK by the House of Lords and also in the EEC. But we just seem to be leaving the status quo there, and yet I've never heard anything discussed other than human rights and democratic principles, and why that continues is beyond me. Are you familiar with this situation, and do you have any comment on the points I've made?
Would you like to answer that question?
Well, whoever wants to speak to it.
All right. Professor, or...
I'm certainly familiar with the group
Shahrooz.
that you're referring to. The Mujahideen, I believe, is the group. All I can really say about them is that my understanding is they've been engaged in certain practices, and it's quite possible that their practices have changed. But it's my understanding that they've engaged in certain practices which were deemed to violate human rights. I think there have been Human Rights Watch reports, for example, about their activities, and engaging in certain questionable activities. I think by and large, in media reports, one often hears them referred to as behaving in cult-like fashion. I'm not an expert on their activities, but I think it's just generally a group that has to be viewed with some degree of skepticism. I know that they say often that they're very interested in human rights, but I think their history shows that perhaps we have to just view them a little bit more carefully. I take no particular position on whether or not they should be on the terrorist list.
Well, the umbrella group is not on the terrorist list. The umbrella one that do the Paris thing, they're not. But when you get into specifics, I've never heard a compelling case, and when it went to both the courts in the UK and EEC, there wasn't any, and the ruling was take them off the listing.
Mr. Ehsassi.
You alluded to the fact that we seem to be lagging on this particular issue, but I think it's interesting to note that the U.S. administration is also lagging. By most estimates, they were supposed to make a determination approximately a year ago as to whether it would be a good idea or a bad idea for the Mujahideen to be listed. However, they've held the process in abeyance, and the reason is that a lot of people do take issue with this particular organization. They're saying that the manner in which, apart from what Mr. Shahrooz said, they said the manner in which this organization operates does not inspire any confidence that it would be a democratic process. However, as you can imagine, there are allegations and counter-allegations, and for that very same reason, this has proven to be a very, very difficult issue for the U.S. administration to make a determination regarding. Having said that, yes, the EU has taken them off their terrorist list. My apologies.
In the UK.
And the UK, yes, correct.
Senator Mohammed wants a supplementary to this, I think.
What additional sanctions by the international community are required, and what is the timeline for the impact? Anybody?
I think the additional sanctions are the ones that I've been consistently speaking about. I think human rights sanctions, linking any sanctions regime that we have with human rights violations. It's not enough just to talk about the nuclear file with respect to Iran. I think if you look at Canada's sanctions regime, everything goes back to the nuclear issue. I think it's important that we move beyond that. We look at human rights sanctions, A, to actually capture people who might not be captured otherwise, but B, also to just for its symbolic value, just to let the Iranian government know that we're aware of what they're doing and that we find it unacceptable.
And this is the largest impact we can have
I think the sanctions, the economic sanctions that currently exist are really far-reaching. I'm not a sanctions expert, but to my mind, I think this is probably as far as you can go without harming the Iranian population any more than they're currently being harmed.
Further questions, Senator Mahal?
That's it, thank you.
That's it. Just very practically to talk about the nuclear file. The debate is, when is the capability changed from a non-military use, or the other way around? When is it a peaceful use, and when does it become a military use? It can be debated. There may be a difference of opinion. But when you say sanctions on human rights, very practically, as a lawyer, so I have two lawyers in front of me, and I'm going to address you. That's the dilemma. When do you put it beyond the regime itself? You know, we've talked about the Guard, should be listed or not, individuals who have high positions in the government of the day can be listed. How do you go beyond that? Because you keep saying human rights. How else, what mechanism to get at human rights violators other than the regime and the individuals within the regime, and then to be very, very careful that we not hurt those that could be trapped, unintended consequences, are the average citizen. So from a legal perspective, what would you wish the Canadian government to do other than more listing, more attention to the regime in the sense of saying, you know, your actions are inappropriate and we can take it up in the Human Rights Council, we can take it up at the UN, we can take it. What else are you suggesting by using that term, human rights?
I think by and large that actually captures what I mean by human rights. I mean, I think that the list of designated persons, for example, under the Special Economic Measures Act should be expanded to include individuals who are not captured currently by looking at the nuclear file. Their assets should be frozen, and they should not be permitted to travel, basically, to Canada, and we should certainly work with like-minded countries to ensure that they're not welcome in any of those nations either.
Ehsassi?
If I may, I take a different approach, not that I disagree with Mr. Shahrooz. He has highlighted a number of very specific means by which we can promote human rights. My concern, if I may, is that I do have problems with the manner in which we have communicated our policy with respect to Iran. It is absolutely imperative that we do come to a resolution on this nuclear issue. There's no question about that. It is an issue which is of grave significance to international peace and security. However, never in our communication of this particular problem have we recognized the dire straits in which Iranians are in. And if I may, if I could compare that with the American approach, they have been very, very responsible in consistently coupling their concern with nuclear weapons with highlighting how terrible the human rights situation in Iran is. In addition to that, I think they have been much more responsible reaching out to Iranians in Iran and to Iranian Americans. And I say that because the way they have framed this particular issue is first of all couples those two concerns, but also both President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton have on numerous occasions actually appeared on Persian language media outlets and explained that not only are they concerned about nuclear weapons, but that human rights also remains very much a grave concern to them. So my concern is that if we do want to embolden civil society in Iran, we can't strictly talk about nuclear weapons. We have to demonstrate that we do care and that we will stand tall and support them to the best of our abilities.
So it's basically the messaging you're saying. What do you think we can do with civil society with the repressive regime that controls so much of it, how can we impact them as Canadians from here in a way that Europe, being very close, the Americans being stronger, have not been able to? In other words, it's a frustration by all countries that we want to reach out to the good forces in Iran to support the people there. And I don't think Canada has been any different. It's a question of how to do it. Now, we have three experts from the diaspora. What else can we do that would not jeopardize their their livelihood and their lives? I've been involved with the community there, and every time the UN tries to go in with a rapporteur, those that reach out to the rapporteur are jailed and tortured. So it isn't as easy as saying reaching the civilians, because those civilians become extremely vulnerable when we do. And our methodology is to reach with NGOs and that. It's less and less of a capability from the outside to influence the inside. But we did hear witnesses say that there's a lot of generation within that society. It's well educated, and that's not the route we should be going. We should continue to put our efforts in condemnation of the regime and aspects, but not to make civil society any more vulnerable than it is now. How do you react to that?
I think that's absolutely right. I think we should be focusing on getting our message out. One of the things that I mentioned just in passing in my opening remarks was providing as much as possible internet technology to activists inside the country. Those would actually allow the activists to circumvent the barriers that the Iranian government puts up. I think the Iranian activists would certainly appreciate it, and they would understand where it's coming from. I think there are other countries that have taken those steps, and that's something that we should be doing. And I think that message would get across very quickly, and it would help us address the safety and security concerns that you mentioned, Senator.
Thank you.
If I could just add to that, in addition to the Internet, another instrument that has been used by both the British government and the U.S. government is beaming television programs and radio stations into Iran. I think it's absolutely critical that we do not sever our ties with Iranians, because as you can imagine, they are dealing with a police state which is constantly feeding them propaganda. Now, I wouldn't for a second suggest that we provide funding for any Canadian stations. However, looking at it more creatively, you may be interested to know that there is actually a Canadian-owned radio station in California, which is called Andisha Television. That particular television, as I understand and as it's been explained to me, actually has a very, very difficult time actually sending out its signals to Iran, and the programming is in Persian. So one of the things that the government may very well want to consider to stop the Iranian government from trying to cut off this radio station sending and beaming news to Iran may be to engage in a bit of a tit-for-tat with the Iranian government, because as I understand it, the Iranian government consistently is jamming radio stations and television stations. However, they beam into living rooms here in Canada. There are several Iranian state-owned radio organizations. So I would hazard to guess that if we're difficult on them, then they will obviously understand that they can't take liberties and will back off in trying to block this Canadian-owned radio station.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think to our study, some suggestions that you've just made. I have a second round, Senator Downs, Senator Nolan, and I think we'll just have time to squeeze those two in, and then we'll go to our next item.
You mentioned in your earlier testimony about the narrow effects of the sanctions that Canada has, that there's only 49, I believe was the number you said, on the list. Do you know how that compares to other countries? For example, how many would be on the list in the USA or in Europe?
think the numbers came from you. So.
I actually am not aware of what the, I couldn't possibly tell you. My apologies for that.
I couldn't tell you with any exact sense either. My sense is that the U.S. list is larger simply because of the fact that they also have a human rights component, which we don't have. So I think they capture individuals that aren't captured by the Canadian list.
So let me ask a more specific question. The banker that we referred to earlier who came here 6 months ago, would that person have been allowed in the United States under their current rules?
Again, I think that would be a difficult determination, but I would think that, yes, he would have made it there in the first place, yes.
Great. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nolan.
Merci, Madame. Je serai bref.
Thank you. I'll be very, very brief. I want to thank our researcher for giving me some data on the presence of students here in Canada, Iranian students. But before exploring that figure, I want to understand this. Is it easy for a young student, a young Iranian student, to leave Iran to come to Canada to study?
There are difficulties for a student that wishes to come here. We've seen problems, for example, we've talked a little bit about getting a visa, for example. Even when the visa office was in Iran, it was incredibly difficult. It was a very timely process, and it was difficult for students to actually obtain that visa in time to be able to come here. It's similarly difficult for students that come here. Oftentimes, they rely on their parents back home to send them money, and as we've talked about at length, it's increasingly difficult to do that. A lot of financial institutions aren't willing to accommodate those kinds of transfers, even if they fall below the $40,000 threshold. So I think with those structural problems in place, it's difficult for Iranian students to come here and study, and increasingly so.
Well, maybe you're going to be able to help me understanding the situation. On December 1st, year 2001, there was in Canada 670 Iranian students, so temporarily resident, here in Canada to study. 1st of December, 10 years later, 2010, 3,247. If you look at, in proportion, it triples on the global amount of student temporarily residents. So if it has been so difficult, why such an increase? I'm trying to understand those young Iranians studying Canada. What are they doing here? Are only studying, or what are their intent? Are they involved politically in Canada? What are their objectives? Are they only here to study, or are they here to do something else? That's what I'm trying to understand.
That's an excellent question. It's a very large number, so it's hard to say exactly what they're doing.
I was surprised to see, and thanks to our research staff, I was surprised to see those numbers.
Given the number, I mean, it's difficult to say exactly what they're doing. Obviously, some of them are here to study. They probably represent the entire political spectrum. As to why that number has grown, I can only hazard a guess. My sense is that doors are closing on Iranian students and Iranians generally everywhere in the world, and Canada may be one of the few places that still allows them to come. My only sense is from talking to people in the community and talking to friends and relatives back home, there are structural problems in place that makes it difficult for students to come here. The fact that number has grown, I think there may be other explanations for it.
If I may, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask the professor, because of listening to Shahrouz's testimony, we've heard that Toronto is probably the main location of where those Iranian students are. So, Professor, you probably know them all by name.
Yes, and Senator Nolan, one of the aspects of your question is how easy not is it to get to Canada and the impediments, but how difficult is it to get out of Iran?
Well, my question was really how difficult, what are those obstacles to come here, and why such an increase in proportion?
Is the Iranian government putting any impediments for people leaving is, I think, part of the question, too. So, Professor, perhaps you have some
Probably you know some of
Yes. Monsieur le Sénateur, I do believe that the increase has to do with the fact that between 2001 and 2010, first of all, you had the Green Movement and the elections, presidential elections of 2009, and in between these years, there have been new measures and at the Iranian universities and putting a lot of repressions on many students, and many students have been thrown out of the university. So the fact that you find many of these students coming to Canada or trying to come to Canada is mainly because they were either put outside the universities in Iran or because of their political engagements during the presidential elections of 2009, they find themselves in a very difficult situation and they are insecure situations. So, and I think the number is even more than that. I mean, I know many students who are waiting to get to Canada to continue their studies.
Well, maybe we should explore that one day.
Yes,
Merci, Madame.
thank you.
Yes.
I think we've come to the end of our time. I'd like to thank Professor Jahanbegloo, Mr. Ehsassi, and Mr. Shahrooz for taking our debate into new directions and new information, and obviously more questions that we're going to have to pursue the answers to. So thank you for joining us, and we will continue our study. If there are any pieces of information that you have or reflections that you want to add, please do so in a written form to our clerk. We would continue this dialogue if we can. So I'm going to excuse our witnesses, and we can turn to our next item, which will be the consideration of the document entitled Passport Canada's Fee-for-Service Proposal to Parliament, dated March 2012, pursuant to the User Fees Act 2004, Chapter 6, Subsection 4, Paragraph 2. We had asked for further information before we were going to deal with the user fee issue, and we did receive that. It's been distributed in both official languages. And are we ready now to deal with the proposal? Do I see agreement? Yes? So I am looking for a motion to begin that the committee recommend to the Senate. Whoops.
Before you entertain
Yes.
a motion to, I just want to thank first the clerk to sending us the answer from the faith to the numerous questions we had on those consular fees. Now, I don't think the limpidity and the clarity of such a document is an exemplar of a good document. It is almost contradictory. I'm not even sure that Treasury Board would understand the meaning of all that document, but nevertheless, thank you very much for providing us with such an answer. Thank you.
Well, I think the document to me proved that there is another modality that they are using rather than the ones that were asked for that they were using before. Secondly, the question, and I've gotten the answer, is that the consular fee portion is subject to the DFAID Act, and should the changes be coming there, they are also subject to the User Fee Act, but it is in a different time and a different process, where before us is really just Passport Canada's fee-for-service proposal. But I think all of the information got was helpful to me, and I hope it was to other senators.
Understand exactly the meaning of all that
Yes.
one document. I'm not even sure that the writer understood at the end what he was writing. Yeah, but
Well, I just
I
sat
think it
in,
was helpful.
yes, in the Finance Committee.
I will not ask any more questions because I don't want any answers of the last one I got.
Thank you for that. The clerk has indicated that if there were a proposal, that it would be that the committee recommend to the Senate to approve the document, Passport Canada's fee-for-service proposal to Parliament dated March 2012 pursuant to the User Fees Act. So is there anyone who would propose such a motion? Merci. Any further discussion? No. I'm looking at Senator Robichaud, and he's getting very anxious. Any further discussion? Are we ready then for the motion? Agreed? Anyone to the contrary? The motion passes. So, honorable senators, following our study of the document, Passport Canada's fee for service, it's okay. I will be reporting this to the Senate. I should say that it was unusual in all the years that I've been here that we've actually had the referral to this committee. It has gone to other committees, and I think this is probably a good practice that if the subject matter touches our committee, it should come here. It shouldn't always be financial things to finance. It gives us the opportunity to learn, but also I think we have the background of the foreign affairs and the passport issues before us in different forms. This is the first time that we've had the finances. So I think it was a good exercise, a good learning experience, and I thank all the senators for contributing. And all that we have left then...
It's over.
It's over, okay. You put as I indicated, we're targeting towards next week for the Brazil report. We will continue the Iranian study. I thought that the munitions, landmines, Bill 10 would be coming to us. We have tentatively booked the minister, and I've been trying to protect his time next week because he is difficult to get a hold of. And so I'm hoping that we will be targeting that legislation and that. But we will have to wait until we receive it. So that, and there are a few other bills still in the House of Commons making their way here. So our process will be continuing the Iranian study, waiting for legislation, and that should take us through the next number of weeks. So other than that, senators, we can adjourn. So this meeting is now adjourned.